Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In the last half hour, the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council, the borough where the Grenfell Tower fire happened, has resigned. Nicholas Paget-Brown said he had to accept responsibility for his role in response to the fire, and in particular for the decision to ban the public and press from a council meeting last night. The BBC has also obtained documents that show that cheaper, less fire-resistant cladding was chosen for the tower block. 80 people are believed to have died in the fire. There's no suggestion a deliberate decision was made to cut fire safety. Kensington and Chelsea Council say safety would not have been compromised in order to manage budgets. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Tom Simons, has more.
Were you pressured by number 10 to resign?
The pressure simply got too great. The leader of the council, criticised for failing to cope with a crisis in his backyard, could not hold on. Last week, his council offices were invaded. Last night, he couldn't even hold a council meeting. It was the last straw.
In particular, my decision to accept legal advice that I should not compromise the public inquiry by having an open discussion in public yesterday has itself become a political story. And it cannot be right that this should have become the focus of attention when so many are dead or still unaccounted for.
His housing chief has also gone. Investigations by the BBC and the Times newspaper into the decisions made when the council refurbished Grenfell Tower added to the pressure. The big change, the addition of aluminium cladding panels to improve the look of the building. We've been investigating that refurbishment and whether it played a part in the tragedy that was to follow. This development in North London includes cladding made not from aluminium but zinc. Documents passed to the BBC reveal that zinc panels were originally proposed for Grenfell. In 2012, the architect's designs show this clearly. Residents were told it would be zinc, but there was pressure from the council on contractors to reduce costs. By 2015, they were given amendments to the original tender and told to fit aluminium composite panel, which is cheaper. The saving, more than £293,000. So did the change make a difference to fire safety? Well, this panel is similar to the ones that were eventually used. It's an aluminium sandwich with a plastic filling, which is not fire resistant. The original zinc panels were marketed as capable of being able to resist fire. Both panels have the same safety rating under European tests. So on current evidence, it's not clear the change would have made a difference. However, even the fact that there was pressure to cut costs has infuriated those affected by the fire.
Those affected and the wider community are utterly sick of this lack of value ascribed to human beings who pay their council tax, who pay these people's wages.
Meanwhile, cladding from 149 tower blocks has now failed government tests. The whole process has been criticised as pointless because only the cladding is being tested, not, for example, insulation, which also burns. Pointless? No, says the testing body.
Very critical at the beginning to do these screening tests, just to see whether there's a risk or not, whether buildings have this flammable cord cladding on or not. Well, many do. So now the question is, what do we do about it? And are there other risks that might happen as a consequence, or are there other materials and other things we need to consider?
There's an immediate crisis to deal with, an ongoing police investigation, a public inquiry, again today described as too narrow. Grenfell Tower casts a long shadow. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Frankie McCamley is at Kensington and Chelsea Town Hall for us now. So, Frankie, the council leaders resigned. The head of the management company which runs Grenfell Tower has stepped aside as well today. What are residents saying about all this?
Well, yes, Fiona, this isn't a very surprising announcement. Now, Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council have been coming under increasing pressure to step aside and let a new team take over. Now, not only has Nicholas Paget-Brown, the council leader, stepped aside, but in the past few minutes we've also had the announcement that his deputy, Rock Fielding Mellon, has also decided to step down. And this follows on from the chief executive of Grenfell, who managed Grenfell Tower, saying that he wants to step aside to help with the investigation and ongoing inquiries. Well, speaking to people here, there is mixed reaction. Now, I've been here for the last few weeks, speaking to people who lived in the tower and lived in the surrounding area. They say that some are happy with this decision. They say they want a new team to come in and take control of the situation, finally, they say. But others say that this is just a PR stunt, and they do worry that nothing is going to change from this. OK, Frankie at Kensington and Chelsea Town Hall, thank you.
Documents seen by this programme suggest that Camden Council made savings of nearly £1 million by removing fire doors from refurbishment plans on some of its tower blocks. As you may have seen on the 6 o'clock news, there's controversy over the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. Now BBC London can reveal details of similar disagreements over how the Chalcots estate in Camden was refurbished, as Alex Bushell reports.
As rows go, this one just turned nasty.
This is a pretty complicated business, so let me make it simple. What we know for sure is that there are 4 tower blocks here on the Chalcots estate that have been evacuated because they are so unsafe. 1,000 fire doors are missing internally, and the cladding on the outside, well, it isn't fire retardant. What we don't know yet, though, is exactly who to blame.
The council thinks it does, though, blaming its contractor, as the leader explained to this programme a week ago.
We thought we were working with reputable companies, and we thought what we specified, and we feel let down that that's not the case.
Now, the cladding may be coming down, but the rhetoric is being scaled up. That contractor, Ryden, has struck back, writing to Camden Council threatening legal action for those specific comments, adding that the council itself signed off on the works as meeting building regs.
BBC London has seen a document which shows that the omission of fire doors from communal areas during that refurbishment contract would save around £1 million. The allegation is that Camden Council not only knew that these fire doors were being omitted, but they wanted that because it was saving them money.
In response, Camden Council released a statement saying,
"We're focusing our efforts on completing the works which will allow us to get our residents back home as quickly as possible. We will, however, conduct a thorough independent review of the history of this contract and the estate."
Well, we asked an independent fire expert for his view as to what went wrong here. His response, subcontracting out this sort of work has undermined standards.
All the checks and balances that we once had, they've gone. All the knowledge which was in local authorities, which was there to provide good quality building and to check to ensure that buildings were put up and maintained properly, that's all gone.
Thoughts shared by many of the residents, like Lulu, who we met as she collected the last of her family's possessions.
Headache, stress, uncertainty. I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't know where it's gonna end. Scared to come back.
This row between council and contractor is of little interest to her as she waits to return home. It is, though, just the beginning of what will be years now of legal arguments. Alex Bushell, BBC London News.
Well, let's get the very latest now on the dramatic developments at Kensington and Chelsea Council. After days of intense criticism, Nicholas Paget-Brown, the leader, has resigned. Tolu Adeyo is at the town hall for us tonight. Tolu, he really didn't want to go, did he?
No, he didn't want to go. Just yesterday afternoon, he sat down with our political editor, Tim Donovan, and said this just was not the right time to go. But a lot can change in 24 hours. This is a man that's been under increasing pressure, and he clearly felt he could not continue. Let's just take a look back at the interview he did with our political editor, Tim Donovan.
Shouldn't you have resigned?
That's not a matter for today. That's something that we will look at in due course. My job at the moment is to make sure that the council has a head that can be recognised. I'm the public face of the council, and I need to be seen to be making sure that the proper response to people's lives that have been so devastated by this tragedy is in place.
Would you expect to be the leader in 6 months' time? Would you accept you wouldn't?
That's not a matter I'm able to discuss now, and it's not.
Well, after that interview with Tim Donovan, Mr Paget-Brown presided over a council meeting that was described as chaotic and farcical. The council had wanted to ban the public and the press from the meeting, saying they were worried about disorder. A judge ruled that the press could be in that meeting, and Mr Paget-Brown had said that therefore there could be no open discussion about the fire, that the meeting could not go ahead because of legal reasons. And in resigning, he referenced what had happened since that meeting for one of the reasons he was going. This is what he had to say.
As council leader, I have to accept my share of responsibility for these perceived failings. In particular, my decision to accept legal advice that I should not compromise the public inquiry by having an open discussion in public yesterday has itself become a political story. And it cannot be right that this should have become the focus of attention when so many are dead or still unaccounted for. I have therefore decided to step down as leader of the council as soon as a successor is in place.
So we've now had 4 high-profile resignations. The council leader, the deputy leader also stepped down today. Before that, we had the council chief executive step down, as well as the man who was in charge of managing the tower block. Now, tonight, Sadiq Khan has said that the government needs to bring commissioners in to take over the running of this council at what is going to be an extremely difficult time.
Tolu, dramatic developments indeed. Thanks very much for that update.
He resisted the pressure for more than 2 weeks. In the end, he yielded to it. Tonight, Nicholas Paget-Brown finally resigned over his handling of the Grenfell Tower disaster, amid mounting criticism and revelations about the way the council behaved. He said he had to accept responsibility for what he called perceived failings after the tragedy. Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, is at Kensington Town Hall. Jackie.
So finally, resignations, all a long time coming for the survivors and residents of Grenfell Tower. 16 days, 16 painful days for people who felt from the very beginning that the men at the top should resign. Well, this afternoon, the chief executive of the tenant management organisation, Robert Black, stepped aside. And in the last hour, the leader of the council, Mr Paget-Brown, and his deputy, Rob Fielding-Mellon, have also resigned. But will it be enough? Well, Mr Paget-Brown's statement didn't offer very much in the way of apology, and the line that he is having to accept responsibility for perceived failings, well, I'd suggest that will enrage families who watched their loved ones burned to death in their council flat, and those who lost everything and are now living in hotels, because for them, Mr Paget-Brown's failings and the failings of his council were more than just perceived. His deputy, Mr Fielding-Mellon, who had specific responsibility for promoting better housing for residents and has only spoken once publicly since the fire, broke his silence this evening. Our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel, has been following today's events.
Is this the first good decision you've made, Mr Paget-Brown? Were you pressured by number 10 to resign?
Tonight, the focus of so much community anger and distrust was no longer answering questions and no longer leading a local authority that has shouldered the blame for so much of the fallout.
This is why I am calling for your resignation.
Despite calls to go, the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council has remained in post since the fire. Last night, he attempted to hold the first council review of the Grenfell crisis in private. When that failed, he abandoned the meeting on the grounds, he said, of legal advice.
Should he resign? Should he resign?
Nothing further to add.
Downing Street took a very dim view, reminding him to respect the rules of open government. And so it was little surprise when, 24 hours on, Nick Paget-Brown announced he was quitting.
As council leader, I have to accept my share of responsibility for these perceived failings. In particular, my decision to accept legal advice that I should not compromise the public inquiry by having an open discussion in public yesterday has itself become a political story. And it cannot be right that this should have become the focus of attention when so many are dead or still unaccounted for. I have therefore decided to step down as leader of the council as soon as a successor is in place. They will appoint a new deputy leader and cabinet. As I said yesterday, this is a huge human tragedy for so many families. The task for my successor is to ensure that the strengths which also characterise this place, and North Kensington in particular, are seen to play their part in bringing the community together and ensuring that this borough, the most wonderful place, can start to move forward from this tragedy. Thank you very much. And I shan't be answering questions. Thank you.
I would like to just ask you a couple of questions. Did Downing Street put pressure on you to resign? Mr Paget-Brown?
Thank you very much.
You said you were going to do an interview, you know.
Slapped down by number 10, lambasted by local residents who simply lost all trust. The shelf life of those running this council is shortening by the day. Ultimately, ministers could place it under special measures, and that would mean handing control over to a government-appointed team of officials. Another perceived council failure was, Channel 4 News has learnt, an initial rejection of help. In the 48 hours after the fire, the memories are of an army of volunteers and an unending stream of donations to help victims and survivors. There was a noted absence of official support and no obvious sign of town hall assistance. Channel 4 News understands that while boxes, bags, clothes, food and emergency supplies piled up, Kensington and Chelsea councillors were allegedly rebuffing offers from colleagues in other areas.
On the day of the fire, on the Wednesday morning, that's when we started to make our first offers of assistance.
And what was the response?
None.
You got no response?
No response.
None, nothing at all?
Nothing at all.
Did you ask again?
We made several offers.
How many?
Probably 3 different people, 3 different times. So different people from our team made offers 3 separate times.
To who in particular?
The leader, the chief exec, comms team.
Because every single time you got no response?
No responses, yeah.
Is that normal?
No.
We asked Kensington and Chelsea just how many offers of help they had received and how many they ignored. There was no response, the focus presumably on the leader's resignation. But he wasn't the only one to go today. The Housing Committee Chair, Rock Fielding Mellon, and the Chief Executive, Robert Black, of the Tenant Management Board, which oversaw the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower, are also resigning. The question is, will that be enough to hold off more government intervention and to win back trust among the communities?
I think it's interesting that Nick Paget-Brown has finally decided to resign today. In the last 2.5 weeks, he's come under intense pressure, with survivors of the fire and families virtually begging him to resign, him or his cabinet, for somebody to take responsibility for what happened. Now, we also know that Liberal Democrats and Labour councillors called on him to resign too. Of course they would. But today we know that he came under pressure from one of his own, from a Conservative councillor, former deputy leader of the council, Daniel Moylan, who said it was time to go. And lo and behold, whether by timing or coincidence, he did decide to stand down. And this will feed entirely into what people on the streets have been telling us for weeks. This was a man who was comfortable among his Conservative councillors, but seemed unable to reach out to the people who had suffered this tragedy. And this is not a disconnection just since the fire, but before. We have seen a letter that was written to Nick Paget-Brown by 100 residents of in and around Grenfell Tower in May 2015, where they expressed their real distress that the tenant management organisation was not listening to them, that they said that they were being bullied by the tenant management organisation. And they have told us that Nick Paget-Brown did not respond. And that has, for them, for the survivors and families, characterised his response to this fire. Also, in terms of his view on people in social housing beforehand. One Lib Dem councillor told us that the Conservatives who had run this council for such a long time, headed up by Nick Paget-Brown, was so disconnected from people living in social housing that they really couldn't understand or couldn't hear the problems that they were facing. Now, Nick Paget-Brown has said he was on the ground from day one, but what we know is that residents felt he really wasn't hearing or feeling their pain, and he wasn't reaching out. We also know that Rock Fielding Mellon, his deputy, who had oversight of the refurbishment project, there are allegations today that it was downgraded to save the council £300,000. Now, Rock Fielding Mellon broke his silence today with his first written statement and said he would have resigned earlier, but he would have felt that it was ducking his responsibility. We know from speaking to many families and survivors that what they wanted to see was these men out and about answering their questions from day one, and that wasn't really how they felt it went.
Jackie, thank you very much. Well, our political correspondent Michael Crick joins us now from Westminster.
Michael, tell us, did Downing Street have anything to do with Nicholas Paget-Brown's resignation, do you know?
Well, I certainly think you can say government had a role in it. There's a report tonight that Greg Hands, the London minister, phoned Mr Paget-Brown this lunchtime. I phoned Greg Hands a few minutes ago to ask him whether that report was true. He said he was not going to comment on that, but that he regularly talks to council leaders. And certainly, I think the writing was on the wall for Mr Paget-Brown once the Downing Street spokeswoman this morning made it clear that Number 10 was unhappy at the way which the leadership in Kensington had tried to exclude the media from that meeting last night and refused to say whether Theresa May had confidence in Mr Paget-Brown.
Any idea who might take over from him?
Well, I think the spotlight now has to be on Daniel Moylan, the councillor who Jackie Long was talking about a moment or two ago, who'd earlier today called on Mr Paget-Brown to go. And this is tonight how Mr Moylan reacted to that.
Well, I think he has done the right thing. And I think that the important thing here is that the council is going to be taking back responsibility for the aid and the support that the victims of the Grenfell fire, the terrible fire, Grenfell Tower fire, and their relatives, the support that they need.
Now, Mr Moylan has said he's not volunteering for the job, but he must be a prime contender. He's held a number of very important jobs in local government over the last 30 years. He's been a councillor in Kensington since 1990 and twice stood for the leadership before. A highly intelligent individual, perhaps most important, well-connected with Theresa May and her husband Philip, and indeed Damien Green, the effective Deputy Prime Minister, because they were all together in Oxford politics 40 years ago. So he, I think, must be the favourite.
Michael, thanks very much. Well, joining me now is Benazir Lashari, a Labour councillor on Kensington-Chelsea Council. Welcome to the programme, Benazir. So he's resigned. Presumably you welcome his resignation. Will it actually make any difference?
Of course I welcome his resignation. I think it's important that he takes responsibility also. I don't think he's taken enough responsibility from the beginning to now. And now yesterday he had an opportunity to actually speak his case and he didn't. Is he wimping out? What's he doing? Where are the answers?
Do you think he should have gone earlier?
He should have gone earlier, and of course he should be held accountable. He shouldn't think that this is going to be a way of him getting out of this. He still needs to come and talk to people, and the inquiry needs to include all of us residents and all the people who saw what happened.
But will his resignation make any difference to the way the council is now run and the problems in the borough are actually dealt with?
Well, perhaps it will make a difference, but do you think that matters now? People have died. You know, we need to deal with what's going on now.
Well, I think the way forward does matter, doesn't it? We want to prevent these sort of things from happening again, and we want to make sure that, as we just heard from Jackie, that the council leaders hear the voices and concerns of the people they represent.
They should be, absolutely, and they didn't. They didn't. They didn't voice the concerns. They didn't listen to the residents' concerns. They didn't listen to the fire safety concerns. They still don't listen. The TMO report to them. They had a duty of care to us, and they failed us.
Do you think the council can actually cope with the tasks ahead?
I hope they can. This is RBKC, the richest council in the universe, so they call themselves.
And do you think the council can act in a unified way? I mean, can you act together? Your political opponents, can you act together for the good of the people?
Of course we can, and we have to. We must put everything aside and be humans, because that's who we are. We're humans.
Because Sadiq Khan has written to Theresa May saying that actually he doesn't think the council is up to it and should be taken over under special kind of management and emergency circumstances for the foreseeable future.
Sorry, I didn't even understand what you just
said. Well, basically,
loud in my ear.
The Mayor of London himself has not expressed an enormous amount of confidence in the council to manage its affairs and thinks it should be taken over temporarily.
Of course it's going to be taken over now. I mean, I can tell you, being on the ground as a resident, I went to the Westway for help 5 days after the fire. I was told by the council, people there, no, we can't help you. 5 days after that, there was a different team there who were helping. So things have already started to change on the ground here. There's help available to residents. So the change has already started. before this resignation.
Now, you're a councillor, but you're also a witness to this tragedy. You were there on the night, you saw it all happen. How do you feel 16 days on? I mean, how are you coping personally?
Personally, I'm not coping. It's very hard for me. I've asked for counselling. I'm still waiting for it. I'm told it will take 4 weeks because it's trauma. Every day is a struggle with my children, my son. Every day he asks me, why is the building broken? Because he can see it outside our front door. He asks me why there's smoke. It's very hard. But as a community, we've always been very tight and we will stay tight. This has brought us even closer together and we want justice for Grenfell. So
you're suffering from post-traumatic stress?
I think we all are. All of us are. Every single person I see is struggling.
OK, Benazir Lashari, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Kathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, 10 million people across the UK live in social housing, many in tower blocks like Grenfell. What the fire revealed was not just the desperate state of some of that housing stock, but the state of Britain today, where the price of private property is soaring, driving inequality between homeowners and those society has simply left behind. But while providers of social housing see the need for safety improvements, they fear that the money for that could come from already stretched home building budgets. And that could make the housing shortage worse, as our economics correspondent Helia Ebrahimi reports.
The long shadow of the Grenfell disaster made for an anxious room at the Chartered Institute's annual housing conference. 10 million people across Britain live in social housing, many in high-rise apartments. Here, their landlords gathered to debate the scale and scope of the industry's response, which could run into billions, and of course, how it would be paid for.
People are shocked, they are upset, they are incredibly concerned, and they're very worried, and you would expect that.
But Britain already faces a housing crisis. For 30 years, we haven't built enough homes, pushing prices beyond affordability. It seems Grenfell has shone an uncomfortable light on social housing and the people society has forgotten. In 1975, the value of Britain's privately owned housing stock was £129 billion. Today, it's worth £5.2 trillion. But amid this vastly growing paper wealth, there's a central paradox. Money, money everywhere, except it seems to be spent on social housing. Behind the lunchtime chatter in Manchester, people are worried about the escalating costs of sorting out Grenfell. One housing boss said it could climb as high as £5 billion. While the safety of residents is the first concern, privately, many worry it will deal a devastating blow to their capacity to build homes.
You can only spend each pound once. Anything that slows down the rate at which we're able to build homes is clearly not helpful. But no sensible person would say we shouldn't invest in the existing stock if we discover that we have a need to invest in the existing stock.
This should have been Housing Minister Alok Sharma, but he pulled out just hours before the speech. Instead, the government sent another minister who caused groans when he shuffled out without taking questions.
Okay, sadly the minister is unable to take any questions.
So I tried.
Why did the housing minister not come? Mr. Jones, you said that the government will help, but you don't want to take on the full cost of the Grenfell tragedy. Could you tell me if the government's going to pay for the escalating costs, please?
You understand this? Say to you that the Housing Minister, Alok Sharma, is spending his time, night and day, trying to help those people affected by the Grenfell Tower tragedy.
But the question's still unanswered. How much would the government pay?
Alok Sharma is currently, as we speak, dealing with those affected.
Thank you very much. And then he was gone. The head of Britain's second largest housing association told me the government had to get involved.
Well, I think some housing associations, like my own, are financially strong. Other housing associations, other local authorities will need help, and I think it's essential that government steps forward.
But what of the scale of the problem?
I think it's absolutely right that we look beyond cladding, beyond the testing that's been done so far, and that we do develop this bespoke approach for every single tower, because the answer will be different from one tower to another.
Social housing is a sector under pressure. Aileen Evans runs a housing association that looks after 12,000 homes. Does she understand the scope of what repairs are needed?
We have no idea.
We have no idea. There isn't clarity from government, and having to find extra money for a big uncertain bill, and we don't know when we have to do it by, I think is a real challenge for all of us. In a low-wage economy where people who don't earn vast amounts of money need somewhere good to live, we either subsidise it at the front end or we subsidise it at the other end via housing benefit. You know, them's the only choices.
If you don't invest in social housing, stock goes down, prices and rents go up, and therefore people claim more on housing benefit, leaving a bigger welfare bill for the government to pick up. It hasn't always been like this. Roll back 40 years and 9.6 million homeowners accounted for more than half the country's housing stock. Another 2.3 million houses were owned and rented out privately, but 5 million homes, nearly a third of all Britain's housing stock, were council-owned, with a tiny sliver provided by housing associations. Today, there are nearly 15 million homeowners. That's 62% of all UK homes. And thanks to buy-to-let, privately owned and rented homes have more than doubled, accounting for a fifth of the stock. But the number of local authority homes have collapsed to just 1.6 million, or just 7% of the total. Housing associations, which were meant to take over from councils, account for just 10% of the stock.
We need to build around 250,000 homes a year or more in England alone to begin to get back on top of our housing crisis. The only time really when we've built at that kind of a level is when we have seen local authorities actively involved in the building of new homes as well.
As the conference clears away, the basic assumptions about the safety of Britain's houses have also been taken apart. What gets built in its place is far from clear, but it's unlikely now to include the extra social houses that are desperately needed.
Helia Ebrahimi reporting there.